Well, today we are speaking about communication, and I would first of all like to know from all of you why you think we're talking about communication. Why do you think it's important when we talk of palliative care? Anybody? Okay, let's think of it this way. Can anyone share one good memory of meeting a healthcare professional that they have? Any one of you. You can write in the chat box or you can unmute and tell us a good memory that you have of meeting a healthcare professional when you went as a patient or as a caregiver. Can anyone share?
Ms. Mona Verma says that it is to know patient in family's mind.
Okay.
Another chat from Sine that doctor listening is very important.
Okay. Okay. And can somebody also share a bad memory that they had with a healthcare professional?
Shana says that for clarity about the situation from all parties, medical team, family, and any others, clarity helps everyone work together towards a common goal without misunderstanding.
Absolutely. Wonderful responses, all of you. Thank you so much. So yes, absolutely. And if you also think about, as I said, if you think about the good memories and the bad memories which we have had with hospitals and with treating teams, we would also notice that generally our good memories are with doctors who looked at us as fellow human beings, who spoke with us with genuine care and concern and respect, and who did not treat us from a high chair looking down upon us. And, as all of you said, spoke about communication and why it's important. It's not just about being in a patient's good books, right? It is about treatment adherence also. It is about the patient's need also, and the patient's right to know about their condition, right? To have clarity about what are my treatment options, what is my prognosis, and about my professional or my doctor or my social worker being accessible for me to openly ask doubts as a patient, right? That is why it's very, very important. And studies also indicate, if you look at research, that there is a major unmet communication need for information about the disease, about prognosis and treatment options, about the intent with which we are doing treatment, the side effects and complications also. So basically what this tells us is we avoid difficult conversations. So when we say that communication is required, what would it give us? What would good clinical communication give us? It would basically enable, as I said, it will enable the patients to express their needs very easily, very efficiently. And it would help clarify doubts and baseless assumptions, right? It would also be very important for me as a person who is in the treating team for this patient to know what the patient's needs are. I can't assume. I need to know what my patient needs from my patient. Secondly, it helps us to better understand the patient's condition, the impact that this condition has had on the quality of their life. How do they perceive this particular condition? What is the meaning that they're attaching to this condition? What are their thought processes about it? So all of this, basically, it gives us very clear understanding about where the patient stands right now in their trajectory, symptom trajectory. Right? Through good communication, we can also convey the required information at each of these stages and to make them also feel supported at each of these stages. Thirdly, very important, it helps us build rapport. Now, why is rapport important? Unless and until I have a rapport with a patient, the patient finds it difficult to trust me. it is also important that if I have a good rapport, there are high chances that it is going to aid in treatment adherence. Whatever the doctor or the treating team is suggesting the patient is going to follow. It's going to help patients and families deal better with the emotional responses to the illness and to the uncertainty also. Right? So overall, simply put, basically, what's going to happen is we'll start seeing clearly exactly where the patient stands physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Okay. Also, these are oftentimes long-term clinical relationships that we are going to establish in the kind of setting that we work in. So long-term clinical relationships are sustained on trust, and communication helps build trust. You already know that the patient, their family, and members of the treating team are all equal participants in the treatment process in a palliative care setting. Now, when there is mutual trust among members of this team, this will encourage rational and shared decisions about treatment, and the patient is then more likely to complete the prescribed therapeutic plan and to adopt health promoting behaviors because we have taken into consideration the patient's needs also. And lastly, it allows a balanced decision to evolve based on the patient's values, patient's beliefs and priorities, yet also supported by clinical evidence and clinical rationale. We are not taking the decisions for them unilaterally. Now, coincidentally, I am currently dealing with a case of kidney failure, and the crux of this case has been communication. And nothing better to illustrate how communication is an essential component of her work. All right. So let me tell you about her. This is a 37-year-old lady living in a nuclear family. She is educated up to 10th standard in a local school. She, her husband, and her 11-year-old son, they live on a farm. Her husband works there as a caretaker of the farm. And now she is unable to understand English. She follows Hindi, but not very fluent at it. Now, given their socioeconomic condition, lack of literacy, lack of exposure to cities, etc., the husband is also hesitant when it comes to big institutions, big hospitals, where he feels he won't be entertained, or he will ask obvious questions and end up looking like a fool, or he won't understand what the doctor is telling him anyways. They have never had to go to such a place either. Both of them quite fit until now. And whatever little health issues they have had so far, they have managed with the primary health center in the village. Now, out of the blue, this lady was diagnosed with a shocking case of kidney failure, the reason being unclear. When she went to the PHC, the primary health center, with complaints of tiredness, swelling of feet, the doctors at the PHC did not want to deliver the news. They kept mum, but they asked her to rush and do the tests at the big government hospital in the capital city, which is around 3 hours from their place. Now, the owner of the farm where this couple worked, he took matters in his own hands and he accompanied them to a specialist. The specialist was an outsider. He did not speak the regional language. Whatever he spoke was either in English or Hindi and directed at the patient's boss, right? The owner of the farm, because he would understand. Now, the husband, who was intimidated by the setup and the doctor and the reports, started pushing his boss ahead whenever it was time for discussion with the doctor, assuming that if I go all by myself, I might misunderstand or I might panic on what the doctor is telling. And the patient herself was not told anything about the diagnosis except that her kidney was not functioning properly. Her treatment began. She was given oral medications, but there were no results. And when they went to the doctor with the reports, he just turned to the couple and said curtly to get her parents for organ donation the next time, you know. So the way he said it was, next time bring her parents, they should give their kidney. That is what he told. The patient found this to be very rude and very insensitive. She refused to visit him again and was taken to a different doctor, who again would also not communicate directly with her, but was not rude. Now, the husband, with his prime defense mechanism of avoidance, got her everything. He got her medicines on time. He got her good food and fruits and everything to eat. But he never spoke to her about her illness, except getting angry at her that she was not taking her medicines properly. And he also complained about this to his boss, the owner of the farm, who contacted me for a consultation. Now, based on what we know of my patient S, let's call her S, do we all agree that what was happening till now was poor communication? Yes. Yes. Okay. So we all agree on that. And when we all agree that this was poor communication, why do you think so? Why was it poor communication? What was happening? There was definitely lack of respect. Yes, there was no explaining done. And at home, definitely there was avoiding the topic. Right, patient didn't know about her disease, patient was not involved or respected or listened to, absolutely, yes. And what could be the consequences of this? We agree that this was poor communication. We also identify why this was poor communication. So what could be the consequences of this poor communication in SS case? Patient doesn't know about the prognosis, right? Patient needed to be, there would be more resistance to treatment, absolutely. So when I mentioned that she was not taking medication, do you think that poor communication could be a cause of this as to why she was not taking her medications? Suspicion about doctor's motive suggestions, yes, absolutely, wonderful. Okay, so let's just look at what are generally considered to be the consequences of poor communication. We'll also see what happened in SS case in this particular scenario. Okay, there are some more responses here. Patient not aware of the real situation, so may not have realized the seriousness of not taking medication. Absolutely. Low willingness to live. Okay. So what are some of the consequences of poor communication? As most of you have already identified, definitely poor symptom control, lack of compliance. Patient may not comply with the plan of care because their needs, their concerns, their agendas have not been discussed and addressed. So as we said, as did not take medications. She was advised a transplant, but that transplant was never discussed with the family. None of the family members came to know that something like this was told by the doctor. There is definitely poor adjustment to the illness and the interventions, which can lead to worsening of distress, as was confused. She was scared because of uncertainty. Conflict can escalate. As I said, I found the doctor rude. There were also conflicts between, her and her husband, where her husband would get angry at her for not taking her medications. It can also impact the therapeutic relations. Just like the therapeutic relation in the first instance was ruptured, where she just refused to go back to the doctor. And also, she might also feel like, just like what the husband was feeling, that what if I ask the wrong questions? What if I ask silly questions and the doctor doesn't like it? And most of the times, medical legal problems stem primarily from poor communication and misperceptions and misunderstandings which ensue out of that, right? Because basically, the patient has a different idea about what is going to be the treatment like and what is the intent of treatment, and the treating team has a different idea, and that is when medical legal problems come up. Now, we definitely saw many of these things in her case as we just spoke of it. So basically, now we know that something positive comes out of good communication and there are negative consequences of poor communication. That much is clear to all of us. There are some people who feel they are good communicators because they're quite sociable and they like to talk. Do you think that's enough? If there is somebody who thinks they're a good communicator because they're sociable, right? No, absolutely, right? Just being able to hold conversations is not good communication, right? One-sided communication is not good communication. So we should also know what is not communication skill before we label ourselves or others as good communicators or not. As I said, conversation does not necessarily mean adequate communication. A good conversation. Hello?
Ma'am, please go on.
Yeah. Okay. A good conversation, but on general topics, travel, politics, weather, is not good communication, not adequate clinical communication. If you're just trying to convince the patient to follow the agenda which we have decided, again, is not good communication. As somebody just said in the chat, listening is also important. Knowing what my patient wants is also important. And just conversing in a very gentle manner, soothing them, calming them. But again, if it's one-sided, I'm not allowing my patient to participate at all. That is also not good communication. If I'm not allowing them to express their distress and I'm just going on calming them, that's not good communication on my part. Right? Okay, right. So as professionals, one very important thing we need to understand is communication skills are not anymore, right? We are not born with these things. But the good news is we can learn and we can keep getting better at it. And yet, we don't. Not always, but sometimes we don't. We really avoid communication. Why is that? What stops us? And what stops our patients? Let's just look at that. Let's first look at the possible barriers that may hinder us as professionals. And this is something we can all relate to. We've all had such days and such times when we have felt at least some of this. Firstly, we might be too busy to spend time to understand thoughts and feelings of patients. There is a long list that I have to finish by the end of the day. Okay, there is a big IP list that I have to finish this by the end of the day. I'm too busy to spend time and long hours with the patient. This happens especially with doctors. It happens a little less with people in the psychology field or social work because we have that at least we have the understanding that I have to spend some time with my patient to get to know what's happening with him. Secondly, you might also be worried about upsetting the patient and handling reactions. And we might just try to soothe and keep them calm rather than opening the Pandora's box. There might be times when we don't really have the knowledge and the skill to do this, which can make us uncomfortable to touch upon these topics. Some of us might be unable to say, I don't know. What if the patient asks me something which I really don't have the answer to? We don't realize that it's absolutely okay to say I don't know. Also, many times what happens is we ask them, we inquire about pain, we inquire about how is their food intake and things like that. Concentrating on physical concerns is much easier. And we don't really touch upon those underlying things, which the things which go deeper and which are causing the real distress most of the times. And this does not mean I'm not dismissing physical concerns, absolutely not. But I'm saying that inquiring about physical concerns in a hospital setup is much easier to do because the patient is also expecting us to do it. Some of us might not perceive communication as part of their job. Now, this is again very less likely to happen with people in the social work or psychology field. But with others in the treating team, this can be a problem that they might think that no, communicating is not really a part of my job. My job is to make sure that they're physically okay. We might also sometimes be worried whether we'll be blamed. And this does happen at times. If we talk about distressing topics and the family sees that the patient is crying, the family might really think that we are to blame or that we are worsening the situation. And again, unfamiliarity with language and dialect is a big problem, as we already saw in SS case also, where the doctor was not speaking her tongue, which might have probably caused some sort of miscommunication and misunderstanding and hindered direct communication with the patient. And why doesn't the patient communicate? There are also barriers from their side, right? Sometimes they might, no, not sometimes actually, most of the times, they would perceive their doctors or their treating team as being too busy. Doctors so busy, why to disturb? That happens with a lot of patients. Many of them might also not like sharing things in this unfamiliar surroundings in front of other people at times in the ward, or where there is no privacy basically to talk about certain things which are private for them. They might also have a perception that only physical problems are to be conveyed. I can tell if my body is in pain, right? What will they do if I tell them I'm scared? That's irrelevant. That might be the perception many a times, because they don't know that we are here to ensure that there is holistic treatment that's happening. So that might be a perception that I can only talk about my physical problems. They might also fear that bad news will be confirmed. What if my fears are true? What if I'm really going to die? I don't want that to get confirmed by the doctor, then I'll lose hope altogether. Now this might be a thought process that the patient comes with, and that is why they don't really open their mouths and ask their questions. They might also fear that treatment might be denied, or the way the treatment is being given might change if I raise any questions, or if it looks like I'm doubting my doctor, something like that. I need this treatment. So what if they don't like that I'm doubting them and they get angry at me and I'm not given the kind of treatment that I need? Another very common barrier is a fear of losing control over emotions. If I start talking about it, I know I'm going to cry and I'm going to lose it. I've been holding strong for so long by avoiding talking about it. That's a very common defense mechanism that you'll see in many of your patients. There are also chances that they are stumped by the medical jargon, the technical terms, which again we saw in SSKs, where the husband would always push the owner of the farm ahead, mainly because he did not understand the language, he did not understand the medical terminologies. And again, the authoritative hierarchy of the hospital environment can be very, very intimidating for some people, especially those who come from a rural background, who have not been exposed to these kinds of surroundings before, might find it really intimidating and might be really scared to even ask or request for anything at all. So as I already said, you might notice so many of these things were present in the patient, which I just, spoke about. And if you are wondering why we're speaking of barriers to communication rather than communication skills themselves, it is important for us to identify these, because only then can we rectify them. And if we're not able to do that, however many skills we might learn, we would still not be able to have good clinical communication if we are not rectifying the barriers. Hence the barriers before the skills. Okay, so let's get to these skills. What are these communication skills? First of all, it's communication. Communication definitely includes acknowledging, understanding the concerns of the patient and the family, right? And also from our side, responding in the most appropriate manner to bring clarity to their current situation. So we take in information, verbal and non-verbal. We are actively, mindfully present and receptive. And then we also respond appropriately. Now, I have here on my slide what we may call as the core principles of good clinical communication. You might notice that it really has very little to do with your language usage and very much to do with being a good human being. And that is the prerequisite, if I may say so. So what does it really take to be a better communicator? It takes respect, treating the patient. This is essential for a healthy relationship, which in turn promotes good communication. Now, all of you know what is the difference between empathy and sympathy, right? Can somebody tell me what is empathy? Anybody? Okay. Putting yourself in someone's shoes. Okay. Trying to understand where they're coming from. Absolutely. Empathy is basically the ability to try to understand another person's feelings by placing ourselves in their shoes. Absolutely. It helps to acknowledge their suffering and it helps to build a good relationship, right? It is very different from sympathy because sympathy is basically a sense of pity, which the other person might very often find offensive and not like. Thirdly, we have trust. If the patient loses trust in you, you lose the ability to help them. So trust is going to be very important. And for that, truthful communication is going to be very important because truth is essential for maintaining trust. Lies, for example, if you're trying to conceal the diagnosis, that is something that can destroy the trust that they have. So trust is very important. And lastly, unconditional positive regard is very, very important. No matter how my patient is, no matter if my patient is being irritable, no matter if my patient is being difficult, we have no right to be judgmental, right? Whether the patient is good or bad, thankful or grumbling, optimistic or pessimistic, we have to try and consider that person as the most important person when we are treating them. In particular, care has to be taken to ensure that we don't come to a position of taking sides. Okay, if let's say there is a rift in the family itself or between the patient and relatives, we have to maintain a neutral stance at the point. Now that we have looked at these core principles, respect, empathy, trust, and unconditional positive regard, let's just do a quick quiz here. It's very easy, okay? Right? So let's say, consider that, imagine I have a patient who has told me this, there are so many thoughts and then I can't sleep. Which of these options reflects the core principles of good clinical communication? I've given here 4 responses. Which of these, according to you, is good clinical communication? D, okay. What about others? What do you think? Which of these is good communication? Okay, somebody says B is good communication. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, there's someone else who's also saying B. All right. So, okay, those who have said B, can you tell me why B? And those who have said D, can you tell me why D? Anyone? If you could just unmute or, okay, D understands the patient's situation. What about those who said B? Can you tell me what made you say B?
Just a second, ma'am. I think it would be better if they, instead of chatting, they unmute themselves and speak about it.
Okay, okay, sure, sure.
Participants, please do unmute yourself and please respond to the questions.
Okay, so I have already seen a lot of responses in the chat. So, okay, let's look at this, okay? First of all, the correct answer is D. When we say it must be so difficult to relax with all these scary thoughts running in your mind, because most importantly, we are not dismissing my patient's concerns. My patient has come to me with a serious concern. If I say, don't worry, it'll be all right, I am taking their concerns casually. This might come across as being invalidating to the patient. And that is why the correct answer is D. Okay, all right, fine. Let's move on. And I think by the end of the session, most of you will be very, very clear. If anybody still has a doubt about why not B and why D, I think that will be clear by the end of the session. Okay, all right. So let's move a little further into the nitty-gritties of communication. We all know that there are two types, right? We know that there is verbal communication. We know that there is non-verbal communication. Verbal is basically all that which is expressed using language. And non-verbal is your facial expressions, your body language, all the gestures that you make. And we all know that communication occurs through both these channels. It happens verbally, it also happens non-verbally. But we are unaware sometimes that non-verbal communication accounts for the bulk of our daily communication. Most of our communication happens non-verbally. Sometimes in some people which we see, could be something like young children, people who are differently able, people who are emotionally overwhelmed and are not able to speak. For them, this might also be the sole means of communication, that they're not able to speak, right? I also want to bring your attention to this point. We rely more on nonverbal communication. If there is a discrepancy in verbal and non-verbal, we trust what is not said. Okay, just to give you an example. Am I visible to everyone?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, all right. So just to give you an example, if I say hi versus if I say hi, which one would you trust? Where would you feel that I am actually saying hi, I'm being welcoming? The first one or the second?
The first one.
The first one. Why is that? I said hi both the times. My verbal
The first one was
communication
more
is
pleasant and energetic.
sorry?
The first one was more pleasant and energetic.
More pleasant, right? It also, did you look at my face? Did you look that I was making the gesture?
Yeah.
Right? So, okay. So when there is a discrepancy between my words and my actions, what I'm saying and how I'm saying, what do you trust more? You trust my non-verbal communication more, right? So the only reason why I told all of you this is to bring your attention to the fact that our patients also communicate a lot non-verbally, and we need to pay attention to that. So it's extremely important that we pay attention to that, we process that, and we respond to that. We respond to all that is not said through words. For example, if my patient is looking gloomy, and when I ask, how are you? They reply with, yes, I'm fine. Do you think I should inquire more? Or do you think I should be just okay with the answer?
You should probe more.
So I should acknowledge that they do look down today, right? Because this will let my patient know that I care enough to notice. Just like we speak about the patient's non-verbal communication, we are also communicating through our gestures, postures, how we sit, the tone of our speech. So we also need to be aware of what messages we are sending to our patients because they are noticing. Let's say, for example, I'm sitting in front of a patient who's crying, okay? And here I'm thinking, oh, now I'm going to be late for my kid's school function. And I'm discreetly checking the watch. And I'm sitting, but I'm very restless and fidgety, thinking of how I'm getting late. Do you think the patient will notice? Yes. Will that create a block in communication? It will, right? So there are simple things about our body language, simple things about our nonverbal communication, which can block or facilitate communication. What facilitates communication is very simple. Things like a genuine smile, an open posture. How often have you seen doctors who are looking into computer screens and appear super busy as the patient comes in and begin questioning even before they look at the patient once? Right? Do you think the patient is going to be comfortable? No, they are going to feel disrespected. Or simple things like going down to the level of the patient's eye level, especially when talking to children, sitting down, going to the patient's level and talking to them, very important. These are simple things, but they indicate respect and they communicate your genuine interest in being here with the patient. And that is the most important thing which is going to facilitate your communication with the patient. Right? I see a lot of responses in the chat as well. Let me just, okay, they'll see the cues. We never go to such doctors next. Somebody says, yes, absolutely. Right. So let's just do one thing. Let's just look at some helpful strategies, some tips that you can use when you communicate. You might already be using many of these, but just consider this a helpful revision, if you will. Firstly, open-ended questions. These are your best friends. Okay, open-ended questions are your best friends. Okay, asking, are you in pain today versus how are you doing today? Is there a difference? How are you doing today and are you in pain today? Is there a difference between the two?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. The first one, are you in pain today? Does it limit the answer?
Yes.
Yeah. My patient just has to say yes or no, right? And it's done. But when I say, how are you doing today? This invites the patient to open up and express, right? Open-ended questions give you more information. And open-ended questions let the patient direct the conversation to what they feel is a priority concern for them. And that freedom is important. Because what happens is, and that's important not just for the patient, it's also important for us. Because otherwise we risk losing out on information that we didn't inquire about. And the patient didn't get a chance to talk about. When we ask open-ended questions, the patient has the power to choose, I want to talk about this to my professional. So make sure you always begin with open-ended questions. That's very, very important. Secondly, always summarize and always check for patient's understanding. Why is this? Just to make sure that there is no discrepancy between what I intended to convey and what my patient received and perceived. It is very useful to summarize discussions because when we summarize discussions, we reinforce joint decision making. We also give the patient a chance to get everything in a nutshell in case they feel there has been an information overload. End of the session, we are summarizing everything so they have everything in a nutshell. So saying something like, for example, I just want to go over what we've been talking about so that we're on the same page. Something like this. And then saying, making sure you're mentioning all the important points that you've discussed. So whenever you're ending, you could say something like, what questions do you have? Is there something you would like to know more about? And this followed by a summary, right? I would like to go through the key points of all that we spoke about from a discussion today. And after this, make sure you're arranging for a follow-up. Now, something like, we'll meet again. And in between also, if you think of something you want to discuss, you have any questions about what we spoke, please note them down and we can speak about it when we meet next. Right? This is basically something that builds a connect between all your communications. So the first time you're meeting, the second time you're meeting, the third time meeting, there is a link between all this. Thirdly, avoid jargon, avoid overload of information. When you're giving information, do not use heavy technical medical terms. Keep it simple. Remember that our goal is for the patient to understand what we are saying. And don't give too much information at a time. Make sure you're only giving essential information in shorter chunks so that it's easier for them to take in, it's easier for them to process. And when you're doing this, when you're giving information, when you're giving it in simple language, encourage them to ask their doubts and their questions. But at the same time, don't force them to ask doubts and questions. Make sure you're respecting the patient's choice about the extent to which they want to know. It is not compulsory that they know everything. It is not compulsory that you have to tell them everything, even when they explicitly state otherwise. When your patient is telling you, I don't want to know about this, it is okay to not let the patient know about it unless and until you need to make a decision right then and there. Next is, most these discussions which we'll be having will have a heavy involvement of an emotional component, right? Make sure you don't avoid facing them. Facing difficult emotions is not easy, agreed, but we need to do it. It's part of our job. So be present mindfully. What do I mean by that? What do I mean by being mindful? Be in the here and now. Don't just be physically present in front of the patient and thinking of something else. And be there without judgment. Without judgment of the patient, regardless of what they're expressing. They might be jealous, they might be angry, they might be irritable, they might be sad, doesn't matter. And listen actively. And when you're listening to them or when you're noting their non-verbal expression of emotions, acknowledge what they are feeling and let them know that it's okay to feel what they feel and it's natural in the given context, because it is natural in the given context. Do not invalidate, right? Let's say, for example, saying something like, there is nothing to be afraid of. Strict no. Never say this. Never say, why are you afraid? There's nothing to worry. This is not helping your patient. You are invalidating their fear, and that's absolutely not okay. Next is, be okay with silences. They help. Many of us sometimes get awkward when there is a silence in communications, and we might rush to just reassure the patient or fill that silence with some pointless communication. But we need to learn to not be uncomfortable with silences and to let the patient take their time to process what has just been said. It's very important. Many times when you are delivering some major news, your patient is going to be silent. It's okay. They need that time. And you need to give them that time. So please don't fill the silence with pointless communication. Why I say pointless is because when you're filling the silence with some communication, most often it's not going to be heard, it's not going to be received. Or if it is received, then we are just distracting the patient from actually processing the information or their emotions and from organizing their thoughts before they respond. So don't interrupt that process of theirs. Let them think through, let them feel, let them organize, and then let them respond. These silences are going to help. Next is, Well, this thing of hope versus truth. When we are delivering bad news, we can definitely do it with sensitivity. And rather than either hope or truth, we can always find a balance between the two. So let's say, for example, me saying something like, we can't do anything more. There is no cure for your disease. So there's no point in continuing to stay in the hospital. You'll only waste money. Am I saying the truth? Am I giving hope? No, right? Okay. If I say something like, if you believe and have faith, you'll surely recover. Am I giving hope? But am I telling the truth? Not necessarily, right? Okay. What if I said something like, sorry, I'm afraid there is no more treatment available to cure your disease, but we can definitely keep you comfortable with medicines, with regular monitoring, and we're here for you always. How does that sound? Is there hope? There's hope and there's truth, right? So that is what I meant by having a balance between the two. You don't need to either be only truthful, like radical honesty. You also don't have to be falsely reassuring and falsely hopeful. You can always find a balance. Next is confidentiality, very important. Always reassure the patient that sensitive details that they might have spoken about are not going to be disclosed to anybody else, that whatever they say is confidential, and that you respect their boundaries, right? About what they want to tell, what they do not want to tell, what they want to discuss, what they don't want to discuss. It is their choice. And always make sure you're inquiring further, especially problem behaviors. Okay, like the patient is not eating, there is social withdrawal, there is non-compliance to medication. Usually there is going to be a deeper underlying problem for this surface level behavioral problem. Okay, so always inquire, why is it that they're doing so? What is making them do it? So basically, to sum all these things up, you start with open-ended questions, you let them lead the way, you speak simply, you validate their feelings, you adhere to the core principles, and you end it by summarizing all that you discussed, right? Make sure that that's answered and ensure a follow-up. This is all that we discussed just now. Yes, I hope that it's clear. Does anyone have any questions? All right. Okay, so moving on. क्या करना है वो तो देख लिया है ना? Let's see what not to do, because that's equally important. Do not moralize, do not philosophize. Don't say stuff like this life is a gift by God. You shouldn't be saying things like I want to die. None of that. Avoid comparison. Look at that patient. He is in so much pain. Rota hai kya wo? Does this patient cry? Why are you crying? None of that. No comparison. There are so many others in a worse condition. Please don't say things like this. Make meaningless statements that can stop further communication. As we already spoke about, there is nothing to be afraid of. Please don't say things like this, because they don't make any sense to the patient at that situation. And jargon, again, something which we already discussed. Let's say, for example, I tell my patient, this carcinoma is quite radiosensitive, so this increases your chances of remission. What does my patient understand? The patient doesn't know what a carcinoma is, what radiosensitive means, and what a remission is. Right? So no jargon. Don't give false reassurance. Don't make assumptions. As I said, always ask what made them ask a particular question or what made them do something. Never be condescending. Never have an attitude of, do you know more than the doctor? Never have that attitude. Okay, always respect your patient. Never force your beliefs on the patient. Yeah, it might be spiritual beliefs, something that you genuinely believe is going to help the patient. But if it is not their belief, we are not going to force it onto the patient. No sympathy, no saying, oh, poor you. No inappropriate humor, wrong jokes at the wrong time. Please don't. No thoughtless honesty. As I said, no radical honesty. It is not just what you're saying, it is also how and when you say it. It is important to be honest with them, but it is also important to be sensitively honest with them. It's more important how you're telling the truth and when you're telling it. So definitely no lies, they are going to break trust. But when you tell the truth, make sure you're telling it in a proper way. And now finally, let's just put things in a sequence so that it's easier to put into practice. Okay. So what are the steps for effective communication? Most importantly, firstly, what you do is you meet a patient, you build a relationship, right? You make sure you have time and privacy when you're with the patient. You sit down at their eye level, but not too close to invade their space, but close enough, of course. You convey empathy with your expression, with your statements. Most importantly, you convey at the start of the session that you care, right? That is how you build a relationship, letting the patient know you're there for them. After which you open your discussion. You acknowledge their feelings, you acknowledge pain, you acknowledge loss, suffering. Basically, let the patient feel that she is or he is understood and not dismiss their emotions, right? You also, when you open the discussion, you also listen actively, which involves eye contact, appropriate facial expressions, your body language, your verbal responses, like saying, in between having these small prompts like and what next, something like that. So basically, you're encouraging the patient to go on with their communication, and you listen to what is said, but also to what is not said, right? Which might indicate suffering. Next, what you do is you gather information. So you explore and you find out what is the patient's level of understanding at this point. What do they know? How much do they know? How much do they want to? And this is where you use your open-ended questions. You ask them things like what worries them the most. You ask them what do they think might be the problem, and you understand what they do. You understand their perspective. What do they feel about this? Do they have any questions? And during all of this, make sure you are prepared for an emotional reaction at this point. And after which you share information, right? Now the patient will decide the agenda for further discussion, as I said, right? What they consider important because of your open-ended questions. And then when they have asked their questions, that is when you get to give information which is required at that point. And if a patient wants to postpone discussion about further treatment, if it is within a reasonable time frame, it's okay to do so. And as I already said, the patient has a right to know everything, but doesn't have a duty to know everything. So we have to confirm what the patient really wants to know and then tell that. And while telling, use common language and check their understanding at every stage. After which you summarize the problems, you suggest a course of action, you answer their questions about it, and both of you together arrive at a course of action. There is an agreement on problems and plans which are acceptable to the patient, making it clear that this is not a contract. These plans are negotiable at every stage. And then you close the discussion, but don't make it abrupt. Make sure you're doing it sensitively. You review, you summarize, and you also leave the door open to talk again. All right, fine. So we have covered a lot of things today. We have looked at what are the barriers. We have looked at what is good communication, what is poor communication, the do's and the don'ts, and the steps for effective communication. After all of this, is anyone wondering what happened to us? The patient whom we visited at the start of the session, and what I did when I met her. Nobody wants to know. Okay, I'll tell you anyways. I did exactly this, what I just told you, the steps for effective communication. I built a rapport. I introduced myself. And I told her I'd come to speak to her about her illness and to know how she's doing. The moment she realized I was not here with an agenda, but with genuine concern about how she was coping, she opened up. The first thing the lady told me was she had heard the word kidney for the first time in her life. She had no clue what it did. Basically, when she was told her kidney isn't functioning, it sounded alien to her. It had no meaning. However, sensing the seriousness in the atmosphere, she came home and she Googled kidney with the help of her son. Okay, and so she understood a little bit about what it was. Now, people who could communicate the right information were keeping mum. They were not saying anything. But there was no shortage of people with baseless information who had no forms or questions about, is this true and how will it impact her? So she heard all kinds of stories about how this means she will die, all sorts of scary, tragic stories filled with negativity and despair. And she did her best not to listen to them. And in an attempt to do that, she overcompensated by denying the seriousness of what has happened. She was tired of the 30 pills she had to swallow every day. She had tons of questions and no one to answer them. So we started right at the beginning with what a kidney is and what it does. Most importantly, that there are two of those and we can function with one. She needed to know that she is not asking her parents to sacrifice their lives for her by asking them to give her their kidney. And the doctor never thought of this. So when we spoke about this, she cried and she let things out. And she asked all the questions and expressed her needs of how uncertainty brings fear, how anxious and worried she is for her son, who has grown up too soon in this ordeal. And if she were to know what was going to happen and what the doctors were doing, she would be much better prepared. She knew what she wanted, clear communication. Knowing what had happened to her, knowing what was being done to her, knowing what could happen to her. Simple needs. At the end of the first session, I did tell her she was free to get in touch if at all she had any doubts at a later point as well. After the first consultation, she became much more cheerful. She started expressing more openly to everyone. The communication at home with her husband improved. We began meeting her son periodically as well, which eased a big load off her shoulders. She began actively working towards treatment. She took the initiative to tell her family about transplant and related issues, which she had not done until then because she didn't know what to tell them. So I met her family along with her and her husband to discuss what treatment options were available. Currently, her father, who himself is in excellent health, has come forward as a donor after discussions within the family. She's taking her medications and she's taking them with courage and hope in her heart. S is fine. Thank you. Right, any questions? Anybody? I think we also have a case.
Yes, ma'am. We have a case.
Yeah.
If there is any question from the participant, we can have that first and then we can move to the case.
Sure.
Yeah, so then Lakshako. From Lakshana, it is saying that why aren't more doctors doing this course? That's my question. Hello. Hello, ma'am.
Hello. Yeah. You mean why aren't doctors participating?
I can answer that question. Like we do have a course especially designed for doctors, and we are currently running these sessions of communication for them also. So I think they can attend communication sessions in the course particularly designed for doctors. That is foundation course in palliative medicine.
Am I taking more sessions? Yes, I will be taking one more session, I think.
Yes, on communication part, the continuation part of communication.
And thank you. Thank you for the compliment.
Thank you, ma'am, for that wonderful presentation. I think we can move on to the case presentation.
Sure.
Lakshana ma'am will be presenting the patient story for us today.
Hi, thank you. Will you be projecting the case on the screen? Because I'm on my phone. Yes, thank you so much.
Is it visible to you?
Yes, it is.
Okay, please go on.
Shall I start? Okay. Okay, next slide, please. So the case, the patient overview in this case, the patient is a 70-year-old male diagnosed with cancer of bowel cancer, colon cancer, with metastases. His occupation, he is a retired government employee in the state of Karnataka. Next slide, please. Okay, so here the medical history of the patient had presented with a persistent cough, and this was during COVID time. So multiple tests were done. COVID came back negative. And the cough, along with the history of chronic gastrointestinal distress, and the fact that there was a family history of cancer with 2 out of 5 siblings deceased from the disease, the doctor prescribed a CT scan, and the CT scan showed a growth in the colon as well as metastases of the cancer, with lungs being the primary secondary site of metastases, or the primary site of metastases. The patient was then diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer and was prescribed chemotherapy and is undergoing the same. Currently, the patient reports an ongoing lack of appetite, weight loss, and fatigue. Next slide, please. So the insight in this case, both the patient and the family are aware of the diagnosis. They know that it is colon cancer, it is stage 4, and that it is a serious condition. The prognosis, on the other hand, that it is a serious condition, uncurable, and therefore potentially in the end stages of the disease. That again, they seem to be aware, but they're not fully, they may not have fully accepted the prognosis in that it is uncurable at the stage that it has been found. In terms of palliative care, the patient himself is not very keen on further engagement with his immediate medical team, that is his oncology, his oncologist and his immediate medical team, was not at all interested in engaging with the palliative team, but maybe open to receiving some aspects of care through the family, in the sense that the patient didn't want to engage himself, but was willing to accept or listen to what the palliative and medical teams were telling his family. The family understands the scope and the purpose of palliative care, and they are specifically seeking guidance and support in the day-to-day management of the patient and the disease, but again seem unwilling to discuss anything beyond the day-to-day management of the disease. Next, the family overview, the genogram in this case, we see the patient on the extreme left, 70 years old, is the eldest of 5 siblings. Of the 5 siblings, 2 have previously passed away from cancer itself and different kinds of cancers. The patient is married to his wife, 64, age 64. The patient currently lives in his own home with his wife. The wife's mother, who herself is bedridden and mostly unresponsive, and has been for multiple years. So he lives with his wife's mother, and his son and his son's wife. So this is the 5 people who live in the home. He also has an elder daughter who does not live with the family, who is married. And both the daughter and the daughter-in-law are currently pregnant. So that is the genogram. Just next slide, please. So some details about this family. The patient has been married for over 43 years with two children, a daughter aged 38, a son aged 34. He lives in his own home alongside the family structure I just mentioned. The marriage has been stable for the most part, although some degree of psychological and perhaps even physical abuse from the patient towards the wife and children is suspected in the past and maybe even continuing. The elder daughter only recently got married and moved out of the family. Somebody is on the thing. Yeah, okay. So the elder daughter recently got married, moved to the family home. She has an IT career and has long been a contributor to the family's finances. The son who lives at home is a career musician, has not been as comfortable financially, but has begun to make some money. Both the daughter and the daughter-in-law are currently pregnant, both having discovered their pregnancies 1 month and 3 months prior to the patient's diagnosis. The daughter's pregnancy also has complications. The relationship between the patient and his children comes off as respectful, if slightly strained. The children do not seem to be resentful about having to be caregivers, but the management of the grandmother who is bedridden, as well as the father who has this diagnosis, as well as the pregnancies that both the daughter and daughter-in-law are facing, seem to be putting a lot of strain on the family. The eco map, the next slide, what the patient and the family both have a strong religious belief. And that is one of a big source of like spiritual support and guidance for them in their lives. They have a reasonably good connection with the extended family, notably the siblings of both the patient and his wife. Reasonable relationship, not too strong, but there. The son's work is and the daughter's work both are a slightly different situation because they both are dealing with different issues at work. So they have a work pressure also. It's not that their work is aware of and supportive of the condition at home. Next slide, please. So the psychological overview of the patient is difficult because he himself is not willing to discuss his diagnosis or prognosis with anyone, including his doctors, including his family. He's not very forthcoming about what he's feeling and experiencing, leaving all the medical discussions to his wife or his children. Even amongst the family, conversation is limited to the functional and everyday management of the disease. The patient has become very reticent after diagnosis and reacts poorly to any conversations about the end state prognosis. So if anybody does bring up talking about the next steps, he reacts with anger, primarily if his daughter raises the subject with him. As mentioned earlier, everybody is under considerable psychological stress as they are managing multiple issues at the same time. The wife and the son are the primary caregivers as they live at home with the patient. However, the daughter and her husband are actively involved in terms of consulting with doctors, taking the patient for hospital visits, etc. The siblings, the son and daughter, have had a healthy relationship, but it is currently strained because they are not in agreement about how to discuss or manage their father's illness. The wife of the patient, who has been the primary caregiver for her own mother, who has been bedridden for 5 years, seems to be having difficulty dealing with the full extent of the situation. She is also not very willing to discuss the end stage prognosis of her husband with her children. And her burnout as a caregiver is suspected because she's not fully present in the situation. The next slide, please. In terms of a socio-economic overview, that isn't necessarily a problem area for the family because they are comfortably well off. They have their own home. Both the adult children have full-time jobs of their own. Family has also got medical insurance. However, one area of concern is that as the head of the family, the patient has full control over the assets and is very, very unwilling to discuss any situation talking about moving on and involving his family in these sort of decisions, and he gets angry when they talk about these things. Next slide, please. In terms of total pain, again, as mentioned earlier, socioeconomic, starting from the bottom left quadrant, is not necessarily an issue. Physically, however, it is, we're seeing an increasing problem because the patient is increasingly weak from the disease progression as well as chemotherapy. He's eating very poorly, as little as 1 meal a day. He continues to be mobile, but just about that, because he needs to be assisted with any key movement, including the daily actions of going to the restroom, moving around in his own house. So that is a physical pain is a definite issue. Psychologically, as mentioned, he does not want to talk about it and is very antagonistic, specifically to his wife and his daughter. He gets very angry about a lot of things and is antagonistic and frustrated. In terms of spiritual, again, that does not seem to be too much of a problem area, because they still they continue to have a strong source of spiritual belief and guidance in their religion and their family guru. Next slide, please. So discussion points that came up from this, how can we sort of help to initiate and have meaningful conversations about the prognosis, which is sort of staring the family in the face, but they're not willing to sort of discuss it in detail. And the next question, please. Next question, please.
It's about something.
I think, is that the only question on this slide? I have.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, so I think that's the question. So yeah, thank you. Any questions? If Sini, you can tell us what we're supposed to do with the case presentation after.
I think the floor is open for questions. If you are having any doubts regarding the presentation, you can ask her. And Mukta ma'am, it's over to you.
Yes, I would also, so based on today's presentation, if anybody has any suggestions to give Lakshana ma'am, that is also very welcome. About the case, what can be done.
Can you hear me, Lakshana?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Lakshana, I just wanted to check with you on the eco map, I guess, wherein you had the four. Sorry, but I don't recall that wavy line and the dotted line here. If you can just explain that, probably I'm forgetting it. So
the wavy line was I remember the wavy line. Unfortunately, I do not remember the dotted line, but I remember that the strength of the lines basically means the strength of the relationship. So religion had the strongest one, extended family existing and not hostile. The zigzag line was hostile, if I remember correctly.
I was just wondering because I felt this hostile line was in the previous map. So only I couldn't just place it. I don't know. I may be getting it wrong. Sorry, but just wanted to check.
Because I just want to clarify this. This zigzag line is something that is stressful relationship that shows. And, so he has stress. He is stressful about the daughter's work, and the straight line is like a kind of okay with that, but he's not satisfied. So that is a straight line.
Dotted line. What is the dotted line? I don't particularly remember.
Dotted line shows the strained relationship. That is like patient is not that satisfied with son's work, but somehow it is okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
So how is the difference between the dotted and the zigzag?
One is actively hostile and one is tenuous. One is actively difficult. If I remember, the zigzag is actively difficult.
Whereas stressful. So, and the other relationship is like extended family. He has a weak relationship with bonding with the extended family and a good, strong relationship with the religion.
Yes.
And actually, we could also have the arrow marks that shows the energy flow, so that it is better to understand that to whom it is most, whether it is towards the patient or it's towards the religion. So if we could add the arrow marks as well, it will be clear enough to understand.
I'll do that. Thank you.
Even the previous slide, if you can just take us through once. Sorry, but yeah, the family tree.
Yeah, okay. So this one is a complicated one. I think so I remember this though. The wavy line basically binds whoever is living together. So that amoeba shape that you see is basically all the people who live together in the same house. The lines that you see in terms of the crosses, the red crosses are people who are deceased and no longer part of the family structure. The shaded lines are for the patient who has a condition. I was looking online for the maps. There are many, many ways of shading the lines to express different kinds of conditions. In this situation, it did not apply, so I did not use them. The red lines, again, the dotted lines are for strained relationships or relationships that are not necessarily healthy. Red as a color as well as the dotted lines indicate strain in a relationship. The green lines are lines where there is a healthy relationship. There is a give and take in terms of communication. There is some respect. So if you see this particular thing, the mother has a healthy relationship. The wife of the patient has a healthy relationship with her children as well as her children's spouses.
There is actually no line between, I felt, maybe I'm wrong, but just correct me, between the father and the son.
The father and
Am
the
I missing
son,
it?
I did not. No, you're probably not missing it. I probably forgot.
Okay. Because I was trying to look because everything seems to be good and green, like,
Yeah, I know there is a...
Excepting for that red thing coming in, that red line, which is like a flow of that negativity from the 70 to 38 and from 38 to 34. So these guys are in conflict, in not that good relation, but everybody else is like a good green line. And also between 70 and 64, husband and wife.
Yeah, that is a missing line. That is also currently a strained relationship. You are correct.
How would you describe that which is not there? Like they are having cordial.
I put that in the psychological overview, but I forgot to put it in terms of the line. So there should be a red dotted line between
single dotted, double dotted.
Single dotted, double dotted?
Yeah, because double dotted means double, like, like seriously problematic types.
I did not know that. I just used...
maybe I'm just thinking too much. And how would you describe the relation? Yeah, how did it describe the relationship between that 70 and 34, father and son? Is it like a green dotted?
Tenuous but reasonably healthy. So I suppose that would be a green dotted line.
Green dotted.
I should have put a scale. Again, I think a key is useful to add to this slide.
Yeah, so I was actually looking at that amoeba shape behind, so you have explained that. वो मुझे समझ में नहीं आया था.
Yeah.
And the person who is 90 years old, she's the grandmom who's not keeping well.
Yes, is bedridden and therefore does not really have a relationship per se with the people in the family, but her bedridden status and her care affects everyone.
Sorry that I think we can have this genogram things later. We can concentrate on the case and have the discussion on that. We have only 5 minutes left now.
Yeah,
and we can refer to the genogram session that had happened.
Yes. One question was like, is he there in hospital right now, the patient? This is concerning the case.
No, the patient is staying at home but receiving treatment at a cancer hospital in Bangalore.
Okay, going and coming types, daycare types.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I had a question actually.
Sure.
Lakshana ma'am, when you said there is disagreement between members of the family, right? Especially the daughter and the son when it
Yes.
comes to treatment.
Yes.
So was there a family meeting which was held regarding the prognosis and the possible courses of treatment?
Right. So the patient's wife, son, and daughter were all present when the diagnosis and prognosis were shared by the oncologist after the CT scan and the biopsy, everything else was done. So they were all present at the same time. So the question answer session with the doctor also happened with these 3 key members of the family present. However, the way that they have taken this information or the way that they are reacting to this information is quite different. In the sense that the patient's wife and the son strongly believe, despite being told that stage 4 is incurable and that the patient is at a significantly advanced stage of the disease, are having difficulty fully understanding and working with the incurable condition, the prognosis that has been given. Whereas the daughter seems to have a better, I wouldn't say better, the daughter's understanding of the prognosis is that it is a terminal situation and that they would be looking at making some difficult decisions in the near future. So there is a disagreement on how this disease is going to progress with the patient from the son and the wife on one end and the daughter on the other end, which is causing a little bit of friction. Because when certain necessary conversations need to be had, it is leading to friction. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Okay. So I would actually ask Mukta ma'am, what would we do in a situation like this? What should be done? What can be done? Because the patient, again, is very belligerent and not very participatory in this whole conversation.
Right, right. I also had another question. Actually, this is the case is actually very apt for the next session that we're having, actually, about stages of grief and how to handle those.
Yes.
In part 2, we are going to discuss about that. So I think most of your questions will also be answered in those, hopefully.
Okay, great.
I also wanted to know whether anybody has worked on building a rapport with the patient, or is it only that? So what I mean to ask is he okay talking about how he feels, or has anyone addressed the anger rather than continuously fruitlessly trying to talk to him about the prognosis itself?
So this is where the psychological overview, that sentence about the past psychological, potentially physical abuse, there is a history of anger from the patient well before the disease, which is causing its own set of barriers about how to communicate with the patient. I mean, there is a strong holdover from the history that the patient shares with wife and children regarding his own anger. And I don't think the children and the patient's wife are equipped to build. Yeah,
I understand that, but has anyone from the treating team acknowledged the anger?
No, I don't believe so. The patient is not very keen on conversing with the palliative or the psychologist at the hospital. So he's not talking. And I don't think that has been addressed at the moment. Like talking to him about his anger and where it's coming from and what to do about it. I don't think that has happened yet.
Okay. No, the only reason why I asked is how we deal with this also depends on what the anger is, where the anger is coming from.
Yes, of course.
It could be anger related to having to let go of his position as the head of the family, especially when you think about him not being agreeable to talking about the finances and handling.
Yeah.
It could be anger as a stage of grief.
Yes.
Where that's his defense mechanism, basically.
Right.
That could also be, so the anger could be due to different reasons. Unless and until we address that, it's not going to, help in any way when we are talking about or rather he's always going to be that disagreeable when it comes to talking about the prognosis, if the anger is not acknowledged and validated, more important.
True.
Rather than, so probably he might also be so like refusing to talk to people because his anger is always viewed as a problem. You know what we spoke about, not judging, accepting unconditionally and validating the emotion. Very likely that's not happening with the anger. Especially given the, and also it's not very easy for us also to do given the history of abuse and stuff.
Right.
So we'll always look at it from that preconceived notion of, oh, he's a man who is,
angry. Yeah. Definitely. So I definitely think that is that situation is there.
Yeah.
But who's going to bell the cat is the problem at this point. Yeah.
And also, I think it's also very important that the family meeting, it's not, if it's not been enough just having it once, when the diagnosis was given. And if you feel that there are still disagreements, then that has to be, they have to be on the same page. They have to be brought together and you have to discuss this.
Right.
Acknowledging where everybody stands and where they're coming from.
Right.
So it doesn't mean that you have to tell the son that is wrong. It's about acknowledging that yes, it is difficult to accept this.
Right.
I have a question for Dr. Mukta, if I can take and ask. Sorry, I was not there since the beginning. I came in only in the middle. That's why I don't have a comment on the first half of it. But just wonder if you have covered the part wherein if the patient is in the state of dementia, is not able to communicate himself, whatever is the here and now present, then how do we communicate to the patient, meaning from the palliative care side?
You mean to say the patient is unresponsive, or you mean the patient is... Hello? Hello?
She said if a patient is suffering from dementia.
Yeah.
I think she has some issues with the range.
Network, yeah. No, I think she has lost network.
Yes. So the question was, if the patient is suffering from dementia, then how will we communicate
with the patient? I think that also depends on what stage of dementia we're talking about and the patient's cognitive functioning as well. Only then can we decide how. Also, senior ma'am and ma'am, if you have any comments on the case, please, and we would like to hear from you both.
No, I think we have covered all the points, and it would be better if we check the genogram symbols as well. I think we already have had a session on that. Apart from that, the case was good, and the presentation was also good. And,